block. Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky block. Los lucky blocks. Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky block. Los lucky blocks. Lucky block. Lucky block. Los lucky blocks. Los lucky blocks. Lucky block. Los lucky blocks. Lucky block. Los lucky blocks. Los lucky blocks. Lucky block. Los lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky block. Los lucky blocks. Los lucky blocks. Lucky block. Lucky block. Los lucky blocks. Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky block.
It's raining tacos from out of the sky. Tacos, no need to ask why. Just open your mouth and realize it's raining tacos.
Tutini Shrimpini. Lucky block. 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 Lucky block.
Trippi troppi troppa
Lucky
trippa.
block. Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky block.
Turbo 3000.
Lucky block.
Giraffa celeste. Tralalita tralala.
Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky block.
Trippi troppi troppa trippa. Guerriero digitale. Shrimpini, shrimpini. Tralalita tralala. Cocofanto elefante. Lucky block. Cocofanto elefante. Lucky block. Guerriero digitale. Guerriero digitale. Lucky 1x, 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 1. Los Lucky Blocks. Lucky Block. Lucky Block. Lucky Block. Lucky Block. Lucky Block. Los Lucky Blocks. Los Lucky Blocks. Lucky Block. Los Lucky Blocks. 1x, 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 1. 1x, 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 1. Los lucky blocks.
Lucky block.
Los lucky
1x,
blocks.
1x, 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 1.
Los lucky blocks.
Gangster futera.
1x,
Los
1x,
lucky
1x,
blocks.
1x,
Trulimero
1x.
trulicina. Trippi troppi.
Los lucky blocks.
1x, 1x, 1x,
Lucky
1x,
block.
1.
Los lucky blocks. Los lucky blocks.
1x, 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 1x,
Lucky
1.
block. Los lucky blocks. Los lucky blocks.
1x, 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 1.
Los lucky blocks. Los lucky blocks.
1x, 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 1.
Lucky block. Los lucky blocks.
1x, 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 1.
Lucky
Los
block.
lucky blocks. 1x, 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 1.
Rocco disco.
Lucky block. 1x, 1x, 1x,
lucky
1x,
blocks.
1. 1x, 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 1.
Lucky
Los
block.
lucky blocks.
1x,
1x, 1x, 1x, 1x, 1.
lucky block.
Los lucky blocks. 1x, 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 1.
Gattatino gnanino. Lucky
Espresso
block.
signora. Los lucky blocks.
1x, 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 1. Lucky block.
Los lucky blocks.
1x, 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 1.
Los lucky blocks.
1x, 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 1.
The payo.
1x, 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 1x,
Los
1.
lucky blocks.
1x, 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 1.
Los lucky blocks.
Lucky block.
Giraffa.
1x,
Los lucky
1x,
blocks.
1x, 1x, 1.
Urubini
Lucky block.
Urubini flamenguini.
1x,
Los
1x,
lucky
1x, 1x, 1. Lucky block.
Tartaruga ci
Los
sta.
lucky blocks. 1x,
Tartaruga
1x,
ci
1x,
sta.
1x, 1. Lucky block. 1x,
lucky
1x,
blocks.
1x, 1x, 1. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block.
Los lucky blocks.
Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. 1x, 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 lucky block. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1.
Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. Coco Fanto Elefanto. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. 1x, 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 1. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. 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 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block.
From out of the sky, tacos. No need to ask why. Just open your mouth.
1x, 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 1. Lucky block.
Tacos.
1x, 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 1. Lucky block. 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 Tralalelo tralala. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. 1x, 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 1. Lucky block. Coco Fanto Elefanto. 1x, 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 1. Lucky 1x, 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 1. Lucky 1x, 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 1.
1x 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 1. 1x 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 1.
Lucky block.
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 1x 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 1.
Lucky block. Lucky block.
1x 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 1. 1x 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 1.
Lucky block.
1x 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 1.
Lucky
1x
block.
1x 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 1. 1x
Lucky
1x
block.
1x 1x 1.
Lucky block.
1x 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 1.
Lucky block.
1x 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 1.
Lucky block.
1x 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 1. 1x 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 1.
Lucky block.
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 1x 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 1.
Lucky block. Lucky block.
1x 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 1.
Lucky block.
1x 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 1. 1x 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 1x
Lucky
1.
block. Lucky block.
1x 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 1. 1x 1x
Lucky
1x
block.
1x 1. 1x 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 1.
Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky block.
1x 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 1.
Lucky block.
1x 1x
Lucky
1x
block.
1x 1.
Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky
1x
block.
1x
Lucky
1x
block.
1x 1. 1x 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 1.
Rocco disco.
1x 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 1.
Lucky block. Lucky block.
1x 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 1.
Los lucky blocks. Lucky blocks.
1x 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 1.
Lucky block. Lucky block.
Los lucky blocks.
Lucky block. Lucky block.
Los lucky blocks.
Lucky block.
Los lucky blocks.
Lucky block. Lucky block. Lucky
Los
block.
lucky blocks.
Lucky block.
Los lucky blocks.
Lucky block. Lucky block.
Treno struzzo turbo 3. shrimpini. Cocofanto elefante.
Piccione macchina.